Rapper Kid Cudi, singer Don Richard, a stylist, and Cassie Ventura's own mother have testified about abuse the singer suffered, all say at the hands of Sean Combs. I take a look at the testimony from 9 witnesses who appear to back up Cassie's claims of violence and sexual abuse and how it could shape the government's case. Welcome to Crime Fix. I'm Angenette Levy. The testimony in Sean Combs' racketeering conspiracy and sex trafficking trial is like nothing we've seen before. There's a lot of sex, a lot of drugs, and sadly, a lot of physical abuse and threats of more violence with guns. There's claims of arson, kidnapping, and burglary, with witnesses walking into court one by one and swearing to tell the truth and telling their stories. And the stories they tell are mind-blowing. Sean Combs faces 3 federal charges: racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, and transportation for the purposes of prostitution. Combs has pleaded not guilty to all of these charges, and his attorneys have said when it comes to Cassie, the relationship was toxic and there was domestic violence. But they say Combs was not a sex trafficker, and his baby oil-soaked freak-offs, Combs said they were consensual. Now, Cassie begs to differ. She testified that at first she was open to trying freak-offs, but as more time passed, she said she felt she had no choice but to participate. And Cassie said there were times when Sean Combs beat her during these freak-offs. Ventura said that Sean Combs directed the freak-offs, and she and Combs would find male escorts to take part in them using Craigslist. Ventura said Combs dictated everything: the use of baby oil, the sex acts Ventura engaged in with the escorts, the drugs that were used, including Viagra, and how long the sessions lasted. Now, one of the witnesses who testified about taking part in freak-offs with Cassie was Sheree Hayes. He used to work as an exotic dancer, and he goes by the name The Punisher. He said Sean Combs gave the directions during the sexual encounters.
And I know that Meredith Foster asked you about, there were times where Cassie Ventura would wince or sigh, I think were the words you used, when yes, Sean Combs would give the instructions. I mean, did the wincing and sighing, could you elaborate on that a little more? I mean, what was your impression of that?
Yeah, so the wincing and sighing was to the specific directions, but my honest assessment of it was some of the directions were very specific. Move this to the right, move this to the left, and they can come repetitively to kind of get the perfect scene, the perfect angle. And I viewed it at that time as just frustration. We're in a sexual and trying to create a sexual connection scene, and then there's these kind of minuscule instructions to do it a specific way. So I saw it as frustration. Again, that's in the moment. In hindsight, I'm sure that there could have been a possibility that the distress was, or what I viewed could have came from a different motivation or a different experience that she was having, but I did not read it that way in the moment.
Now, Hayes saw a lot, but he said one thing he never saw during his 8 to 12 meetings with the couple was physical abuse. Another witness who testified about seeing Sean Combs physically harm Cassie Ventura was her former best friend, Carrie Morgan. Morgan said she was friends with Cassie Ventura for 17 years until 2018. Morgan did not want to testify at the trial. She wanted nothing to do with it. She said so on the stand, so federal prosecutors had to subpoena her. When asked whether she ever saw Sean Combs abuse Cassie Ventura, Morgan said she had seen Combs hit her, pull her hair. I've seen him kick her, push her. There were 2 specific times Morgan said she'd witnessed Combs physically hurt Ventura. Once was in 2013 on a trip to Jamaica. Another time was at Combs' home in the Hollywood Hills. Morgan told the jury that the times that she saw Sean Combs assault Cassie, he was not intoxicated. Now, Combs' defense team has blamed his drug use for the violence. Morgan also testified that Sean Combs choked her in 2018 at Cassie Ventura's apartment, and Combs did so while demanding she tell him who Cassie was cheating on him with. Then Morgan said Combs threw a hanger at her head, which caused her to later vomit, and she was diagnosed with a concussion. Now, Morgan said her friendship with Cassie Ventura ended when a few weeks later they met at a pizza place, and Cassie told her that Sean Combs would pay her $30,000 if she'd sign an NDA. Morgan said she signed the NDA and accepted the settlement, and her relationship with Cassie ended because her friend did not support her in that situation. Carrie Morgan backed up Cassie's claims of physical abuse. She also backed up her claim that she felt she couldn't leave Combs because he controlled everything in her life, including her career. That would support the government's claim of coercion in the sex trafficking charge. This is another Law and Crime legal alert. If you received Depo-Provera birth control shots and were later diagnosed with a brain or spinal tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible to take part in a lawsuit. Morgan & Morgan is investigating claims that patients were not properly warned about this risk. It's free to check, takes just a few minutes, and you don't pay unless they win. So scan that QR code that you see on your screen, click the link below, or go to forthepeople.com/LCDepo to see if you qualify. Cassie's mother, Regina Ventura, also testified about seeing bruises that her daughter suffered and photographing them. But Regina Ventura testified to more than that. She offered testimony to support the crime of extortion. Regina Ventura testified that her daughter sent her an email after the Kid Cudi incident in 2011, telling her that Sean Combs was threatening to release sex tapes of her and hurt her and Scott Muscudi unless she sent Combs $20,000. Regina Ventura said she received instructions from Combs' staff on how to wire the money. She wired it, but then the money was sent back to her a couple of days later. The defense did not cross-examine Regina Ventura, which was a pretty smart move. Capricorn Clark, Sean Combs' former assistant and brand manager, and Cassie Ventura's former manager, took the stand and testified about setting up hotel rooms for freak-offs. And Clark testified that Sean Combs had the final say over everything about Cassie Ventura's career, from her hair and outfits to her music. But one thing that Clark backed up about Ventura's testimony was her claim about that 2011 incident involving Kid Cudi at his home. Clark testified about the break-in by Combs at Kid Cudi's home and then taking Cassie back to Combs' home afterward, and Combs kicking her several times from the foyer of the house all the way to the street. Clark said Cassie was in a fetal position and curled up and crying. Now to Kid Cudi. The rapper was dating Cassie Ventura in 2011. He testified that Sean Combs broke into his house in 2011, and the following month, someone tossed a Molotov cocktail into his Porsche. Kid Cudi, whose legal name is Scott Muscudi, testified that Cassie Ventura told him that Combs physically assaulted her. However, Muscudi said on cross-examination that Ventura never told him about any forced sex. Escort Daniel Phillip testified on the first day of the trial that he was hired to have sex with Cassie Ventura during a freak-off and that he overheard Sean Combs hit Cassie from another room. Phillips said that Ventura was shaking and crying. On cross-examination, Combs' attorneys asked whether Cassie was the one in control of everything. Phillips said he couldn't say that was the case. Next, one of Combs' personal assistants, George Kaplan, testified that he saw Combs physically assault Cassie on an airplane. He purchased makeup to cover up bruises of Cassie's, and he also set up hotel rooms for freak-offs. Kaplan was granted immunity to testify. Kaplan said he actually quit working for Combs because he felt guilty for not intervening and stopping the abuse. Dawn Richard, a former member of Diddy Dirty Money, took the stand and told the jury she saw Combs attack Cassie with a skillet full of eggs. The defense went after her on cross, pointing out inconsistencies in her statements and pointing out that Richard wanted to work with Combs even after she saw the abuse. And then there was Deontay Nash, the stylist who worked for Combs and Ventura for many years. He testified to witnessing Combs assault Cassie Ventura and trying to intervene along with another victim who's using the pseudonym Mia. Nash said one time Cassie was hurt so badly blood was actually pouring out of her head after she hit her head on a bed frame. Nash said that Cassie even tried to jump out of a window to escape at one point. He also described hiding out in hotels with her to get away from Combs, and Combs' chief of staff, Christina Coram, calling to track her down.
All right. So to talk about where we are with all of this testimony now, I want to bring in Dr. Megan Sachs. She is a criminologist and she is also the co-host of the Women and Crime podcast. So Dr. Sachs, thank you so much for coming back on. I really appreciate it. So we've heard quite a bit of testimony. Obviously, Cassie Ventura, I should now call her one of the government's star witnesses in this case. She's the most well-known, I should say, of the victims in this case, because a couple of them are testifying under pseudonyms, so we don't know their identities. But she certainly was with Sean Combs for 11 years. She testified to a lot of physical abuse, and now we have people like her longtime best friend, who's no longer her best friend, testifying to the physical abuse. So how important is it in a case like this? This is a federal case with racketeering charges, sex trafficking charges, to have corroborating witnesses.
Yeah, I think that's going to be very important, of course. I thought Cassie's testimony was very powerful, and I think it made an impact. But what's the saying? There's power in numbers, right? So the more people to corroborate, the stronger the testimony becomes. So I do think that it's really important step by step and one by one that the government brings in people to corroborate all of the information.
And one of those people, you could say that, you could say that some of these people might have an axe to grind or they have a personal relationship with Cassie. One of those people would be her mother, of course, Regina Ventura. But Regina Ventura brought the receipts, if you will.
Yes.
There's an email where her daughter emails her and Capricorn Clark and says, Sean Combs is going to release sex tapes of me, and he's going to hurt me and Scott Muscuddy, Kid Cudi. He wants $20,000. So Regina Ventura testified that, Sean Combs' staff, and this is part of this whole, I guess, the government's argument about a criminal enterprise, wired at Sean Combs' staff's request $20,000 from her home equity line of credit. She wires $20,000 to Sean Combs. The money comes back a few days later or whatever, so she gets the money back. But that goes to that extortion part of the RICO charge and the Combs, criminal enterprise. So that's a pretty compelling piece of testimony right there.
I thought that was a very strong piece of testimony. You made a good point. Oftentimes, when you bring in someone's mother or a parent or someone very close, you have to question the reliability of the testimony. In this case, there's no questioning. It's documented, and it is, I thought, incredibly damaging to Combs' case, an incredibly strong piece of evidence for the prosecution. It's credible. It's there. It's documented. You can't. There's no really walking that one back. So I think that's really, really strong piece of evidence for the prosecution.
We also have this, the testimony about the freak-offs. And I feel like, the baby oil gets so much attention, the baby oil and the lubricant, and there's so much focus on that. Baby oil, lubricant. I feel like we just have heard so much testimony about it. Do you feel like the government is focusing too much on the baby oil and the lubricant, or do they focus on that because everybody knew about it and it was such a big part of this? Because I feel like it's just like we've heard so much about it.
I think it's like enough already with the baby oil and lubricant. That doesn't prove anything in terms of the allegations here. It's salacious, it's dirty, it's weird, right? Like some of us might think so.
I feel like it's like, well, and how much baby oil? Like it's like they ask everybody, and how much baby oil? But it's like, does it really matter? We've kind of covered that.
No, I don't really think that's incredibly important. And I don't think that does anything to support the actual charges, because they have plenty of other evidence and plenty of other witnesses. I just think it's kind of like this icky thing that keeps coming up, and maybe it's kind of, it's paints a picture of him as kind of an icky guy, but is it really necessary to the case? I really just don't think so.
I want to go now to the stylist, Deontay Nash. He was on the stand all day and a better part of the day on Thursday, or a part of the morning on Thursday. And he saw a lot. I mean, he's talking about hiding out with Cassie Ventura at hotels, hiding out from Sean Combs, watching her get abused by Sean Combs. She's being physically abused. Sean Combs's position is this was a toxic relationship. Yes, there was domestic violence. He beat her up, but this was not sex trafficking. This was, I'm not a racketeer. This was domestic violence, and that's it. But he's talking about her fear, her legitimate fear of Sean Combs, his control over her career, that he okayed all of her outfits, her hair. He was in charge of everything.
Everything.
It was almost like she was a piece of property. So how important is testimony like that when it comes to the sex trafficking aspect of this?
I thought Deontay Nash's testimony was incredibly important for a few reasons. First of all, as you point out, it does show the extent of the physical violence. And it's one thing to say we're in a toxic relationship where both parties are behaving so, but it's also another thing to be in a relationship where you are actually the abuser and there's a victim. So I think it is for dispelling some of the idea here that it was toxic between the two. No, you have an incredibly abusive man. So that goes to his credibility too, just so you know, or the defense's claims about their relationship. But also Deontay Nash is pointing out that Cassie was fearful of him. She was worried about her career. And I believe he also testified to the fact that she didn't want to participate in these freak-offs. So I think he's backing up some of the claims here that Cassie has made about her resistance to participating. And, I think this is going to, or the defense, they're trying to show that Cassie was a willing participant. And I think Deontay Nash is good at negating that idea. I think he's a good witness to establish that. Also, from what I understand, he was very likable on the stand. And
yes,
that's very, that's good as well.
Well, the defense is trying to say, look, you're still friends with Cassie Ventura. And he said, Mrs. Fine. They said Ms. Ventura, and he said, no, Mrs. Fine. I mean, he had talked to her as recently as the day before. What should I wear? Congratulating her on the birth of her son, that type of thing. So basically, they're saying you're biased, that type of thing. Yeah. They're implying that in the testimony. But, does this go to that fraud, or I'm sorry, does this go to the coercion part of the sex trafficking? The fact that she's a victim of domestic violence. Yes, she's being beaten, and that kind of puts you into this mindset. And then he's paying for everything. He pays for her house. He's in charge of her career. He's not going to release her music if she doesn't do this. I mean, he calls her all these names, the B word. He calls her a slut and a hoe and all this stuff. I mean, does that go to the coercion part of the sex trafficking piece of this? Because she is then taking part in all of these freak-offs where she was open to it at first, but then didn't want to do it.
Right. I mean, this is going to be argued both ways. Some people are going to say that, no, this doesn't really go to the sex trafficking. It just shows that she's truly a victim of domestic violence. But I think overall, taken all together, all of this information does go to the coercion and how she didn't really have a choice, or she didn't feel that she had any type of choice. So I would see this, I think you could argue it both ways, but I do see the support for the coercion in his testimony as well. And look, yes, they're going to say, you're friends with her still, you might be biased, but there's going to be other witnesses we know the government's bringing in to possibly corroborate what he's saying. So this goes back to also, again, strength in numbers, power in numbers.
And one thing I thought was interesting, I mean, this is a guy who's a stylist, and he actually he testified he tried to stop the violence. And so did Mia, this victim, this other victim who's testifying under the pseudonym. They both tried to physically intervene. I mean, that's the first we've heard of anybody trying to stop Sean Combs.
It was really, I thought, incredible to hear that. But I think also it's hard to watch someone you care about, being assaulted. Like your instincts might kick in. And I know there's other instincts. You might freeze because you're fearful, of course. But I think the protective instinct kicked in. Like, we have to help this woman. So, it was incredible to hear that there are people who jumped in, of course, but not totally surprising that someone had the instinct to protect this woman from what was happening to her, and witnessing it is really traumatizing too.
Yeah, I just am horrified that there were grown men, like other grown men who were like security and stuff like that,
Right.
who allegedly just stood by and watched
Right.
Cassie Ventura get kicked to the street. And I mean, these people are just standing by and like watching this woman get treated worse than any human should ever be treated, or an animal or anything. It was just horrifying to me. And that's kind of my next segue. Capricorn Clark testified to this, witnessing Sean Combs, kick Cassie Ventura so many times after the incident with Kid Cudi, kicking her from the foyer of the home all the way out to the street, kicking her. I mean, just, and then saying to Capricorn Clark, if you do anything, I'm going to F you up too.
Yeah.
And Capricorn Clark was, an employee of his at the time.
Yes.
So I kind of wonder, does that go to the enterprise part of this too? You're ordering him to bring Cassie to you. She brings Cassie to him, and then he just beats the daylights out of her. It's just really, really crazy.
First of all, let's just say that it is. Hearing that was, like a wow moment, I think. In hearing this woman who was also seemingly traumatized by what happened and her role in that. But I would say that is very strong support for the criminal enterprise part. I thought that was a very big piece of this puzzle. Yes, he's ordering employees to take part in his crimes. He's using employees to facilitate his crimes. There it is. So yeah, I thought that was very strong for the government.
And then we had ex-assistants, George Kaplan, testifying to seeing violence. Something that hasn't gotten as much attention is this forced labor part of this. These assistants, and this isn't really part of Cassie's testimony, but these assistants are working like over 100 hours a week, and without days off, working 3 weeks straight. Yikes. That's part of that RICO charge as well.
Sure. Look, there's a lot that's come to light about the extent of this enterprise. And I think there were some doubts in the beginning. Some of us questioning, how's the government going to make this total RICO case? And if you see it, piece by piece, witness by witness, they are making the case. They're laying out the true extent. And I don't think most of us could have anticipated just how much was involved in this enterprise, to be honest.
And I just want to wrap up with Kid Cudi, of course. The Kid Cudi car bombing. They've had the fire investigators testify. They tried to investigate this. It led to a mistrial request when there was this, I guess, the government implying that Sean Combs might have had something to do with evidence disappearing, some fingerprint cards or something like that. And then you have Kid Cudi backing up Cassie's claim about the physical abuse, and the burglary, the break-in at Kid Cudi's house. He came across very well.
I thought Kid Cudi came across very well, very honest, very credible. And yeah, he's supporting Cassie's statement. He's talking about his home being broken into. He's talking about an arson that's committed, his vehicle, He's talking about some very serious crimes. And this does substantiate earlier claims. And of course, the defense will say, but there's really no proof that you can't prove who did this. And so that's kind of a way to dispel it. But sometimes the simplest explanation really is the one. Who do we think did it, and how can we corroborate that? I think there's enough there probably to make the case for these claims. And I think his testimony was helpful. I do think a lot of the testimony, I will say in general, the government, the witnesses they're calling, they're building a strong case.
Dr. Sachs, any final thoughts?
Yeah, and one thought I had is I wonder if later on at the end of this case, if Sean Combs is going to regret turning down that plea deal that was offered to him early on.
We will only have to wait and see. He's saying he didn't do any of these things, but in the end, it will be up to the jury. Dr. Megan Sachs, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's it for this episode of Crime Fix. I'm Angenette Levy. Thanks so much for being with me. I'll see you back here next time.